Hey, welcome to my channel, Treetop Flight, where I'm documenting the build of my RAN's S-21 Outbound plane. This is episode 5, where I'm building the elevator and the trim tab. I've currently put in 96 build hours before starting the elevator. Unfortunately, the month of December had me working on some other projects, and I did not meet my goal of 100 hours per month in December. But it's a journey, not the destination. The elevator involved a few new skill sets and frankly had me doing more process research than the other components up to now. I did get a little bogged down rechecking and researching several areas before moving ahead with the build. If you take the attitude that mistakes are not an option, you can definitely get gun-shy moving forward in many places. Well, let's get into the elevator build.
Okay, we're starting the elevator. It's a lot of the same process as the stabilizers, so I'm not going to go on with this. We're priming the stainless steel rivets for the hinges. We're attaching the frame together, and we'll work on the skins next. There is some skin rolling, which is a new technique that we haven't used previously, but we'll cover that in a little bit. The elevator is riveted together other than the hinges on the back. I'm waiting for the primer to dry on the rivets. Fairly straightforward, but pay attention to the instructions. A lot of different size rivets, a lot of overlapping of items. These end tip riveting, you got to be careful, and most specifically this horn installation. You've got a lot of layers of different things that you got to make sure they're in the right order and you're using the right rivets. But other than that, pretty straightforward assembly instructions. The next thing is to start putting the elevator tab, trim tab together, and that's a new section, so we'll start on that tomorrow. The next thing I'm going to do is install these nut plates for the servo. They go in these ribs here. These holes have to be drilled out to a number 11, and I've got my elevator upside down, so it's a little bit reversed from the picture, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky trying to see which way these go. It looks like they're mounted inside the rib hanging down, and they're riveted in after you drill them out. You're going to use these smaller number 40 Clecos and also the smaller 3/32 aluminum rivets to get these in, and that's after you've drilled out that center hole to a number 11 drill bit. The next step is to attach some trailing edge skins, and we're back to removing tabs on skins again. I use a Dremel with a little metal cutter, and then I buff it down with a grinder. This next section I got a little confused, and I'm hoping it will work out shortly. They tell you to attach the trailing edge skin to the ribs only. There was no problem with that, but there are no holes in the top of the skin on either one of them, on either side, both the top and the bottom. Usually they give you one set of holes to go into. And in the diagram, it does show that there's holes in the top of it, and I read ahead a little bit in directions to try and figure out when you're going to drill these, and I don't see when that's going to happen. So I'm just going to keep moving forward, and I will explain this later. I'm next going to attach the top skin, and they say to Cleco that heavily. So I'm going to put the top skin on, and we'll see when these holes get put into place. The trim tab is pretty straightforward. You've got a trailing skin, a spar, a few ribs. Just kind of make sure you got the directions of the ribs going the right way. You've got some brackets. The most complicated part is you work on it upside down. The longer flanges are the top, but most of the stuff gets riveted with the holes in the bottom. So you just got to invert your diagram from what you get in the manual, and recognize the manual is looking top down. So you've got to kind of invert it and reverse the parts when you put it in and put it together, but pretty straightforward. The next step on the trim tab, after you've Clecoed the bottom of it and Clecoed the horn, the trim tab horn, you turn it over to the top side. You get it on some level wood, level it, weight it at each end or wherever you have twist in it, get all the twist out of it, and then you're going to transfer drill all your cleco holes or all your rivet holes along the spar and ribs so you can get the top side riveted. After you do that, of course, you got to take it off, clean it all up, get it all deburred, and move on from there. The next thing we need to do is we need to put a bend in the leading edge of the elevator skins, and we're going to do that by clecoing them to a pole and then twisting the pole about 90 degrees. The manual recommends a PVC pole. Project 2 Arrow said that they got a metal pole from Home Depot, which I also purchased. It's a little stiffer than the PVC, and it's about 1 1/3 inches in diameter and should work well for it. So we'll cleco it up and move on from there. To get a straight line down my pole, I just took a long aluminum leveling bar that I had, held it tight against the pole, and then drew a straight line down that way. And there I ended up with a line going all the way down my pole. I'm jumping around a little bit on the build, but I'm waiting for some help to help me turn my skins. I need 2 people, 1 at each end. I've got it all clecoed and ready to go, but I need another person to help. So meanwhile, I'm going to cut my hinges. I need 3 sections of hinge to put on the back of the trim tab and elevator. I'm going to cut them into 3 5.5-inch sections. I've got them marked off. That leaves about 1 inch extra at the end. I'm going to knock the pin out from the middle first, and then just use my Dremel and cut the 3 sections and sand them down. Okay, the skin curling went pretty well. I did use this aluminum bar that I mentioned earlier. Put a straight line on it, clecoed the skins. It says to turn the rivets 180 degrees so they come straight up, and that resulted in about a 85 to 90 degree turn in the skin, which is exactly what it was asking for. Here's the first one that I did, and it's lined up perfectly onto the elevator. So I think we're good on the skin bending. Anyone need a pole? Let me know. The trim tab and horn is riveted, except where the hinges are going to go. You want to leave those rivets out, but you just drive along, and that's the top side where the hinge is going to go. The horn is on the bottom side. You use a slightly larger rivet for the horn, but other than that, pretty straightforward riveting. The next step is to flip over the elevator and get it supported, and then bring the trim tab in, and we're gonna line this up with the elevator and make sure it's all flush. Previously, they said to leave these 2 clecos in because this is where one of the hinges is going to attach, but I'm assuming I have to remove these in order to get it lined up and get that trim tab centered in there. Back to you in a minute. I've cut the hinge material into 3 5.5-inch sections, and the pins, which you pull out before cutting, into 3 6.25-inch sections. So you've got a little overhang, which basically in the installation you've got a twist in it, and you're going to wire tie it on to hold it into place. So I've cut that, and then on the elevator trim tab section, I'll see if I can get over there, I've laid out the trim tab off the trailing edge of the elevator, and we'll install the hinges. I've shimmed and centered the trim tab so that it's lined up equidistant and flush on both sides. And I come down here and I've got it lined up equidistant and shimmed so that it matches up. Then I've got the hinges placed inside, of which there's no holes in the hinges, but if you come over the other side, it's going to give you the holes that allow me to mark to punch the hinges or to drill the hinges for the clecos and then the rivets. So we've got it leveled and lined up, so I will mark the hinges and get those drilled. What I've done is I've drilled and attached the hinge with a cleco on one side, and The manual says to flip the rig over at this point and work from the other side, but following another builder's recommendation, I just went underneath and marked, using the holes underneath and using a Sharpie, marked where the holes need to get drilled for the other side of the hinge, making sure that the trim tab was in place all the way down and still lined up. And I just went underneath and marked all the holes for the hinges on the other side, drilled them, put them back in place, and everything lined up fine. So at this point, we're going to take the trim tab off. We're going to attach the first set of the hinge, and then tie down the pin. And we'll come to that in just a second. The hinges turned out to be a little bit tricky, but where I am right now is I've just removed the pins. I've got the hinges in. I drilled them. Don't forget to counterpunch the hinge before you drill. My first one, the bit started to wander. Forgot to counterpunch it, but after counterpunching, the bit held true because those holes have to be dead nut center. Then I've already removed the pins. The pins are down here. And as I pull the trim tab away from the hinge and flip it over, you can see that I've got the hinges clecoed to the trim tab. I just finished riveting the hinge brace to the strut, and now I'm going to rivet to the trim tab, and then it says to tie down drill the little counter holes and tie down the hinge pin with some tie wire, and I'll cover that in just a second. But let me get these riveted, and then we'll work on the tie wire. Step 10 says to safety wire the pins to the hinges after the final assembly. There's not a lot of instructions to how to safety wire. There's a small diagram in the RAN's guide, and they did supply some safety wire pliers, but I didn't see any safety wire, so I ordered some from Spruce. Got on the RAN's forum. They said the .032 is the standard. They have .025, .041 for different situations. I got a roll of each just in case in the future part of the build. This held me up for a couple days waiting for this to come in. Instead of using Lyman pliers, this actually just puts a twist in it by pulling on the end of the rod, and it twists right around. This will be the first time that I've used this pair of safety pliers, safety wire tie pliers, but saw a video on it. Doesn't look complicated. But once again, another one of those steps. It took me a little more research to figure out how to finish it up. So we should get this safety tied and be finished with the elevator trim tab fairly quick. Okay, the way these work is you run your tie wire through the two holes that you've drilled around your bent hinge. You clamp on the pliers, the Y-tie pliers, by pulling this button, holding it down like vice grips, and closing this in. And then all you do is you pull on the pliers, and that will twist your wire. Whoops. And you do a couple pulls until you get the wire nice and tight. And then you hold the grip down and release the pliers. I bent this over and then trimmed it using a pair of snips. And that's how you wire tie the hinge pin. The trim tab is on. The process worked well. The hinges are on, the pins are in, they're tied, and the trim tab moves freely, so I'm happy with that. The next step, as you notice, is I flipped over the elevator. What we need to do is we need to transfer drill some of these holes. So, well, first we're going to wait and level the elevator. Get it all leveled, again shimmed so it's all level and weighted. Then we will transfer drill the top skin and rivet the top skin. Get that all done, and then turn it over and do the same process on the bottom skin. The top skin is riveted, and I flipped the elevator over and I'm starting to cleco the bottom skin. And I noticed that I've got a trim tab servo cover, which in the skin diagram shows it being installed. I did look at a couple videos and no one seems to put it in prior to riveting their bottom skin. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and cleco, weight and level, and then rivet or transfer drill the holes. Again, the same as the top skin. Transfer drill the holes, take it all apart, deburr, clean, and then rivet. And I'm going to leave this servo cover off. I've put the Tinnermans in, but it doesn't look like I need to have the servo cover on prior to riveting the skin. I hope that's the case. If not, a couple builders before me made the same mistake. So we will move forward with that. Okay, we've got the top skin clecoed, leveled, and weighted. One quick observation is that the overlap on your bottom skin and top skin, it doesn't really show clearly in the manual pages, but you want the top skin overlapping the bottom skin so that when water drips off the wing, it of course would drip off the plane and not go into the wing if there was a slight crack. Just an observation as you're putting the skins together. Time to transfer drill the holes that you can see are not drilled through. So we'll transfer drill using the number 30. Take it apart, clean it, deburr it, and rivet it. Well, I've talked about rivets in tight places and using a aluminum wedge. This is a crude one. I've seen nicer ones from other guys, but this one works. It was on one of my previous videos, but I'll show you my demo on it. It's just a piece of aluminum with an angle to it. If you have a rivet in a tight place, you slide it over the mandrel. I'll bring the rivet gun in this way. You bring the rivet gun in, and you can actually tilt the rivet gun at an angle. And as long as you're pushing down on the wedge, it's going to keep the rivet flat as it pulls up against it. Mandrel comes out. I pull my wedge away, and you can see that's a perfectly flat rivet. So where the gun just won't fit in these things without bending the mandrel and putting an angle at the rivet, a little piece of aluminum is all it needs. This is just from a piece I made around here, but I've seen some nicer ones. But it works. But that's the wedge concept. Google rivet wedge and you'll see all kinds. I think Airplane Spruce sells one for 25 bucks, but that's just a little piece of aluminum and it works fine. Thought I'd show it. The next section here is to put these elevator tips on. And they give you some skins which wrap underneath the elevator skin. They give you a rib that kind of goes up underneath, and there's a extra hole here. You can see where they go. Flanges facing forward. Flanges facing forward. Then they tell you to drill out the last hole. This is where this cleco is. Right here is the last hole. You drill that out, but not the other two. So I'm not exactly sure why, but it'll probably make sense in a little bit. These tips appear, they don't mention taking them off, but all the other skins, we've taken these tabs off. So I will cut the tab off as I watch a video of someone else and his tab is gone, although the manual doesn't tell you to do it, but it's kind of common practice at this point. And then they want some epoxy inside here and some BBs or lead shot for counterweight, which is going to go in there somehow, which we'll figure out as we get further down the instructions. So this is just getting the pieces put on and clecoed, and then we'll work on the other end after we figure this end out. I'm just about to close up the elevator tips. I'm going to make two comments that I didn't see clear in the instruction manual. These balance ribs that you put in the end of the tips form a little cubby hole, and later on you see that after the painting is done, you're going to actually put some lead weight in there to balance the elevator. Some people have epoxied or bondoed, I'm sorry, not epoxy, but they have bondoed some of the inside of this that apparently when you pour the epoxy and lead in, it can seep out some of the spots. I'm looking at any seepage point. There's only two little holes up in the corner, down in that corner, up in that corner, which I'm thinking you can easily just tape over from the outside when you pour the epoxy in until it sets. Then they say you can use a foam filler after the epoxy and the BB lead sets to fill up the balance. I don't see the necessity to bondo the inside of this. Everything is so tight that I can't see epoxy leaking through anything. It's not spelled out in the manual, but several of the builders have commented. Some have done it, some have not. And a close inspection of these skins, they're very tight to the ribs and to this balance rib. I don't see any epoxy leaking through that as an issue. And again, the manual doesn't specifically say to do that. The other thing that the instruction manual doesn't ever tell you to drill out these final skin holes. I'm going to do it now. I'm on the other end. I'm just finishing the tips. You can see that the tip end is put in. I've clecoed it. I've just got to rivet it. Don't see any reason not to transfer drill these holes and rivet the balance of this. The only issue is by waiting so long, I can't get in there and really clean. I can get sandpaper underneath the skin and clean it a little bit, and I've got a deep reaching cleaning tool. But I'd sure not like to leave shavings in there. Maybe I can get a little vacuum in here and get the shavings out. Again, it seems like these should have been drilled out a little bit earlier, but I went back through the manual, didn't see a place where it said to do it. No harm. I'm gonna rivet them when I rivet the tips, and then the elevator should be complete. Then we're on to the wings. I clean up the workbench. God, you get a lot of stuff out for the elevator. You just keep pulling out stuff and pulling out stuff. So I'll look forward to getting it all cleaned up and starting on the wings. The servo is going to get installed after painting, but there is a servo cover. That's one of the Rand's plastic parts that needs to be put on as the servo cover. I'm just going to use my Dremel. I've marked the line with the blue tape. Kind of marked with a Sharpie, a fine point Sharpie, the access arm hole. And I'm just going to use a Dremel and try and Dremel it smooth. We'll see how that goes. Okay, the elevator's done. There's a couple small things that still have to be done after it's attached to the stabilizer, but it's not attached to the stabilizer until the stabilizer is attached to the fuselage, which isn't done until the fuselage tail cone is put together. So for now, that's all we do to the stabilizer, or to the elevator and the trim tab. We'll put this on the table and I'll do a little wrap up and then we'll start on the wings.
Well, the elevator was definitely a little more challenging than the other parts up to now. But Rand's has done a good job laying out an order that continually increases your skill set. The elevator took me 39.7 hours to build, which brings my total build time to 135.7. I also want to thank the bakers for allowing me to use their plane as my main photo, as I think it's one of the best looking 21s out there. Thanks for watching. I appreciate the support and nice comments. I'm on to building the wings now, and remember, dream it and build it.